Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I apologize for being a few minutes late today. We had some StreamYard difficulties, but all smooth sailing ahead. Today, I am quite honored to have Erica Salmon Byrne, who is the CEO of Ethisphere. So, Ethisphere is an organization that I was not familiar with, to my discredit, but I'm very happy to know about now because they are doing really important work and important research in the field of ethics and the impact of ethics. So, welcome, Erica. Really happy to have you with us today.
Karen, thank you so very much for having me. It's really my pleasure, and this is probably my favorite piece of the work that we do. So always happy to come on and talk about culture and ethical leadership in particular.
Wonderful, thank you. And just for those who are watching us live, you can post comments, which we'll see. We can't post back, but happy to see any comments that you post for us. So, Erica, maybe you could just start with, let me start with, good to see you again. Erica is actually someone that I have met live and in person. We met in New York a few weeks ago, and it's very good to see you again.
Likewise.
Um, I'd like to just start with tell us what Ethisphere does. I feel like you are an organization that is not as well known as you should be, and
Mhm.
so just to help us understand what it is what's the mission of the group and what it is in specific that you do.
Yeah, no, Karen, thank you. So Ethisphere was founded on the ethos that good businesses do better. So
Mm,
back in 2006, 2007, when we got our beginning, obviously there was a lot of coverage in the news in particular of companies that hadn't perhaps been as good as we would have liked them to be, the sort of the scandals of the early 2000s. And we really believed that there was a fundamental opportunity to celebrate companies that were doing things well, that were committed to being good members of the communities in which they operated, leading ethically, caring about employee development an ethical decision-making perspective, safeguarding their culture. So that has been the mission of Ethisphere since its founding, and to a certain extent, we feel like the world has finally found us. Right, a lot of the narrative right now around ESG, whatever sort of pieces of the acronym you focus on, fundamentally speaking, at the bottom of all of it, the interest in it is around material non-financial risks. Right,
mm,
so what are the risks that I face as a business that my investors, my stakeholders, my employees would be interested in and care about? And it makes a tremendous amount of sense, right? Because if you think about the way that most businesses are constructed today, 70% of the average company's value is tied up in intangible assets. So
yes.
unlike the early 70s, where 70% of a company's assets were physical things, it was factories, it was inventory, it was stuff, you could touch it. Now it's all intangible. It's IP, it's brand value, it's people. And
Mm,
that's where the culture piece of it really comes in. So we've been helping companies measure their ethical culture since early 2016. We're sitting on a data set now of about 2 million employee responses, and we really felt like it was time to parse that data and get it out to the world so that people could start to put some of our insights into action.
mm. So I just dived in. I don't know the word into this report, thinking that I would just skim it, but there's so many amazing takeaways. So we are going to talk about some of these, audience, but please know this is a report worth downloading and looking at yourself. And I will add a link to how you can get to the report underneath this posting as soon as we conclude our conversation today. So there's just too much to go into here. So I, but you unveiled this culture report, more than 2 million employees,
Yep.
global focus. So what are some of the key findings from the report that really stood out for you?
So there are three, Karen, and the first one is the one of the cuts that we did on the report was pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Even though I don't know that we can really say we're in post-pandemic, but pre-pandemic and then pandemic and after, because we all know that the world of work changed dramatically when
Yes.
in March of 2020, and so one of the questions that we wanted to answer using our data was, where did we see differences from the data that we had collected up until March 5th, 2020, and then the data that we had collected after March of 2020. And one of the most interesting findings to me was the decline or relative steadiness in most types of observed misconduct after we all went home to work remotely, or those of us who could go home to work remotely went home to work remotely, but the remarkable rise in observed bullying.
Mm.
And, it's consistent with what we see out of the ILO reports, right? So this is a data trend that we see in our data, that we also see in other data sources, that really there has been a breakdown in civility that has shown up in reported observed cases of bullying. Now, unfortunately for all of us, the observation of bullying has gone up. The reporting of bullying has not, right? So this has been a situation where what the data has shown us is employees indicated that they saw more bullying, but they were not more willing to report it, as compared to sort of the pre-pandemic era. And I've had a lot of conversations with people internally inside companies of kind of what have they seen in their own data? What have they seen in their own employee interactions that reflects the same trend? And what most people seem to land on is it was easier pre-pandemic to pull somebody aside after a meeting and say, you know what, I didn't really like the way you spoke to Byrne.
Yeah.
It's harder to do that in writing, in email, right? If you see somebody using a tone in email that is perhaps not conducive to, collegial environment, Slack really lends itself to people just kind of shooting off, behind their keyboard, perhaps in a way that they never would have said to an employee if they were speaking to them face to face. Even Zoom, we're looking at each other's faces, but we're not really looking at each other's faces. So what that says to me is one of the other trends we see in the data: manager preparedness matters more than ever. So what the data tells us is managers are really key to comfort level speaking up. They are key to prevention of retaliation, which is the primary reason that people don't raise their hand. They are key to so many component pieces of the leadership puzzle. But when we went home, we really focused on helping managers understand how to help their people get their jobs done. And I think a lot of companies didn't have time or energy or bandwidth to focus on how to manage people in this new world.
Sure, because I think we can safely say that everyone was under tremendous amounts of stress, particularly early in the pandemic. By the way, I'm using endemic now, so
Great. Okay,
pandemic's
perfect. I
not
like
quite
that.
being over, but we've moved to endemic. So anyway, that's my framework. But people were under a great deal of stress, both the employees and the managers. There was, we don't need to recount all the things that were going on, but a great deal of stress that people suddenly came into. And so my story would be that part of the bullying increase was caused by that.
Yeah.
And then people not knowing, and managers and peers really, even not knowing how to respond when bullied, to your point about manager preparedness.
Yeah, absolutely. And not necessarily feeling comfortable, particularly the younger generation. So that's the other thing that really stands out to me in the data, Karen, was we also, with an N, the size that we get to play with now, we were able to do a lot of work cutting the data demographically. And so the other thing that is in the report that we released publicly last week was a data cut looking at generational trends. And one of the things, again, that we saw in the data is the youngest workers, the Generation Z members of our workforce, while they are currently a smaller proportion than millennials and us poor neglected Gen Xers, they are probably less likely to report than other generations for two primary reasons: fear of retaliation, right? So, and that's consistent across generations. Fear of retaliation is the primary reason people don't raise their hand. But secondly, and equally importantly, nothing would happen anyway, so why should I bother? So that's a lack of trust in the system, right? That's a lack of faith in the process. And that is something, if I'm a compliance officer, particularly, who is going to be dealing with the Department of Justice's focus on voluntary self-disclosure, well, you can't voluntarily self-disclose what you don't know. And so if you really have a sizable proportion of your population, and that portion of the population is going to grow next year and the year after that and the year after that, if you have people coming into your workforce who don't have faith in the process, then you really have to get to work showing them that the company will actually look into something if you raise your hand, that something actually will happen, and the thing that will happen is going to be fair. And the best way to do that is storytelling, because it's going to be showing people how it works. Maybe you can't share the details, right? Maybe you do it Law and Order style, right? The names of the individuals involved in this story have been changed to protect the innocent, but really walking people through, this is what happened here. This is why it happened. This is how we found out about it. And this is what we did. Those are going to be the kinds of things that are going to get people's attention and show them that they actually can trust the process. The other thing that's key is following up with somebody who raises a concern. So it is very understandable when you raise a concern, it goes into the machine, and the machine then takes care of it from the employee's perspective. And they may never know what came of it because they see the employee, the person that they complained about still there. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, that Karen, you and I are colleagues, and I'm out to dinner with my family, and I see you out to dinner 3 tables over with a key competitor, and you guys seem a little cozier than I'm comfortable with. I go to my manager, I talk about that. The manager raises it internally. It goes into the investigations process. Well, I'm watching you come into work every day. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. I think the company hasn't done anything. And that experience of mine is something I'm going to talk about the next time that somebody comes to me and says, I think I ought to say something about this thing I saw. My reaction is going to be, well, I told my story about Karen, and Karen's still here, so don't bother. It's just words. They don't take it seriously. As opposed to if you're on the inside of that box, the investigators came and talked to you. You explained this person was your cousin. It was a conflict you had disclosed. You weren't talking about anything other than family. But I don't know any of that because no one's taken the time to educate me, the reporter, on how the process works. So the best companies right now, the companies that are doing really well in our culture survey measurements, are the ones that are taking the time to explain to employees, look, here's how the process works. Here are the kinds of people we talk to. This is how long it takes us on average. These are the kinds of things that could potentially come out of the process on the back end. You could get coaching. There could be a good explanation, all of those kinds of things, because what we've done as compliance professionals in particular is we've done such a good job of emphasizing the termination part of up to and including that I don't know that there's any possible outcome other than you getting fired.
Right.
I don't know about coaching, right? I don't know about bonus impacts. I don't know about any of these things. So we really have to take the time to put the reporting employee at the center of the process and think about what that person needs in order to create a safe and open speak up culture.
Yeah, that is so important. It just really strikes me, Erica, and what's happened here is that the reporting employee has taken a risk.
Yes.
And in some cases, I can imagine that was a fraught risk in terms of thinking about what could the consequences for me be. You mentioned earlier people's fear of retaliation being really high. So an employee has taken a risk to bring you information. Whether the information is sort of actionable or not, they have taken a risk. And when you don't respond to that risk by being transparent about what's happened in some way, or what you do with the information, they're not going to take a risk again.
Right.
They're in fact going to help shut others down, as you said. The other thing you said that really struck me is that there has to be a process in place for making sure that the risk taker is taken care of. Right. I think it's something that's too important to leave up to, I put it on my list of things to do today. Right. There needs to be a process in place that's pretty fail safe. I know that in the report it said many people spoke with their manager. Maybe that was the most frequent, or also the manager's away. But there's so many other ways now to report. I was on the advisory board of a company called HR Acuity, which is software for supporting organizations to take reports, all right, and then to follow, make sure that the follow through happens. Yeah. What are you seeing in terms of the different ways that people are reporting that are being successful?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Karen, and this is a place I think that technology is going to have an opportunity to radically improve the paradigm that we're all operating in over the course of the next couple of years. What our data tells us is that for most issues, right? So if you having dinner with your cousin who works for a competitor example, that's the kind of thing I'm going to want to go to talk to a person about, more likely than not. And so when we break down the types of reporting channels that employees are using for different kinds of issues, what we find is that on average, an employee is 6 times more likely to go to their manager than to use a hotline. And we've done ourselves a little bit of a disservice by calling them hotlines in particular parts of the world, because that has a very negative connotation. So in Europe,
Yes.
if we cut our data in the EU-based employees are 22 times more likely to go to their manager than to call a hotline. Because again, hotlines and whistleblowing and all those kinds of terms have particular historical connotations in that part of the world that really are counterproductive to encouraging their use. So 2 things from a technology perspective. One is making it as easy as possible for that manager who gets that walk-in or that phone call from an employee to tell the right people, because one of the challenges is, if you look at the satisfaction data, an employee will raise a concern with their manager, and then we ask that employee, how satisfied were you with the process? And about half of the employees that raise a concern with their manager were not satisfied with the process at all, because they didn't feel like anything happened. Because they raised it to their manager and it stopped there. The manager froze. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go. They put it on their to-do list, and it kept moving down towards the bottom. They didn't think it was that big of a deal, so why should they bother? I raised a concern about, to go back to my hypothetical scenario, Karen, you're the highest performing salesperson in the region, so the manager's not going to mess with you because you're really critical to the manager hitting their metrics. So I'm sure whatever it was that you were doing at dinner with the key competitor was totally fine and was not you guys fixing prices at all, right? That's the kind of thing that can happen when you don't properly prepare your managers to be that channel. You make it too hard for them to raise a concern, or they don't know where to go. They're unlikely to actually, speak up and use that particular, get the information to a place where the company can do something with it. The other thing I'll say about the tech in particular is if you look at the interest level of the youngest generation of workers in particular, they want app-based reporting, right? They want something where I can, really easily on my phone. These are digital natives. They don't want to pick up a phone. They don't want to talk to somebody in a call center, somewhere in the world about their issue. They want to do a quick little voice note and put it in an app and set it to where it needs to go. And so I think in the next couple of years, we're really going to see the app-based piece of things switch the paradigm from a reporting perspective. But at the end of the day, if we go back to that, why do people not raise their hand in the first place conversation, making sure that managers are creating an environment where employees feel comfortable using their voice, they're psychologically safe to speak up, is the most important thing for us to do. So the tech's great. We're going to make it easier for people to raise their hand. But if I'm still nervous that I'm going to be retaliated against for bringing you information, I'm not going to do it, right? I'm not going to take that risk. I love that phrasing of, this particular person is a risk taker. It is a risk to raise your hand and say, I think this is going on. I don't know this is right. I didn't like this. And so the easier we make that, the safer we make that for the employee within the nucleus of their team, the more likely they are to give us that information early and often. And at the end of the day, that information is a gift, right? That employee is bringing you something that you can do something with. And so the more you can demonstrate that attitude of gratitude for that information, the more likely you are to keep those channels open.
Right. I mean, what we want is a culture where it is a normal, natural part of the culture when you have a concern to express it, right?
Yep.
It doesn't have to be like a 9 on a 10-point scale of how serious this might be. There's a concern without making up a story about what might be going on. Just raise it and get information.
Yep.
I mean, that's the high performance team mentality, right? We're just sharing information about what's going on. And if you don't have these processes in place that you've discussed, that can't happen. Let's talk a little bit in our remaining time about what organizations can do. This was a question also that Peter has just raised from our LinkedIn Live audience on what is that organizations can do to improve their ethics. And in particular, I'm thinking about what leadership can do because I think it all starts there.
Yeah. So a couple of points for leaders. First off, I absolutely agree that it all starts there, right? It's a bit of a hackneyed phrase in the ethics and compliance space in particular, but tone at the top still matters, right? Where we still care about tone at the top. And so I would say a couple of things. In the way you are talking as a leader, don't assume that the compliance team has it covered for you. right? Your words matter to the people who report to you. And so looking for opportunities to slide key ethics and compliance related topics or ethical decision-making related points into your normal way of speaking. So think about, you are giving a speech at a gathering of your top 300 leaders. Is there a story you can tell about a way that you made a decision or put a value into action that ties what can sometimes be esoteric concepts all the way through to the business realities? Are there ways that you individually as a leader can demonstrate that you welcome voices at your table? One of the things that I love to do with leaders in particular is to ask them what their gut reaction is when someone on their team brings them bad news. And this could be on a spectrum of whose throat do I choke to how do I fix it? The closer you are to the how do I fix it end of the spectrum, the more likely people are to bring you bad news early when you can still do something about it. The closer you are to the whose throat do I choke end of the spectrum, the more likely your team is to conceal bad news until the very last possible minute. And we all know that that means the problem's going to be harder to solve. So what can you do? What behaviors can you engage in as a leader that get you closer to the how do I fix it end of the failure spectrum, as opposed to the whose throat do I choke?
I love that.
That's something really concrete that each leader listening into you and I today, Karen, you guys can all close your eyes, right? We're living through some interesting times, and we have for the last couple of years. The last time something went wrong, what was your gut reaction, right? Was your team afraid to tell you that something had happened? And if the answer to that question is even any small piece of yes, you need to ask yourself why, right? Why were they afraid to tell you? And how do you then resolve that environment of psychological safety?
Yeah. I love that you brought that up. In fact, my newsletter this very week was titled Bring Me Your Problems. And when I was a very, very young boy in an organization, my boss, the CFO, told me, bring me your problems. And I was like, what? Am I not supposed to solve problems? And he's like, no, bring me your problems when they're small and we can just
Yeah.
deal with them, right? Same thing here. If you have a concern, bring it when it's small. And the manager and leader's responsibility is to say, thank you for bringing me
Yes.
a problem. Not
Yep.
that you're putting the monkey on my back to solve it, but you're making me aware of it. And
Yep.
it is a gift, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can work it through together, right? We can work it through together. I will show you how I work it through. And that is the best way to disseminate the ethical decision-making model across the members of your team, who then hopefully are going to go on to be leaders of their own teams. And then they can then disseminate do the same sort of thing with the people that are reporting in to them.
Mhm.
And I think, Karen, the thing often that I end up saying to managers and leaders about this particular piece as well is remember that a safe and open speak up culture does not end with an ethics related issue, right? A safe and open
Mhm.
speak up culture is one where I've got a new product idea. A safe and open speak up culture is one where I've got a client challenge. Teams perform better across the board writ large when you have these kinds of environments. And so that is a business reason. It's not just the right thing to do. It's, again, to go back to our founding, good businesses do better. That it's a business reason to create this kind of environment because your team will be more successful if you take the time to make sure that they all understand that their voices are welcome.
Exactly. So more we could dig into there, but I do want to spend just a few minutes, if we can, on
Yeah.
you, because here you are leading this organization. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about what your career path was, how you came to be CEO of this organization, and not so much a recounting of what you did, but sort of why you did the things that you did to get here.
Yeah. So, Karen, I was a young attorney at a law school, junior associate at what ended up becoming DLA Piper in
Mhm.
DC. And I found myself on the team that was representing WorldCom in the bankruptcy court examiner's investigation. And it was a absolutely fascinating learning process to kind of watch, because of course the company was our client, watch the good people who were still there handling the fallout from what had gone wrong. And I ended up
Mm.
doing, over the course of the next couple of years, 14 internal investigations while I was with the firm. And each time, because the company was our client, I saw the fallout of what happens when somebody doesn't feel comfortable raising a concern. And so
Hmm.
in 2006, I got the chance to switch to the proactive side of things and to start doing good compliance program design. And that has been my passion ever since, is really helping companies design programs where people are comfortable raising the thing that was going wrong early enough that we end up with fewer WorldComs.
Yes, well said. And I know there are many people who worked at WorldCom who I can think of a couple of other organizations that are just sort of in the ethos today
Yep.
that I don't have good associations with in terms of their ethics. I know there are
Yep.
many good people that work there, and I know they were at WorldCom as well. But once this culture takes hold, it's hard to root out without the
It
sort of
is.
systemic, prolonged effort of
Yeah.
the sort that you put in. Yeah. Wow. Terrific. Well, thank you. I just want to, again, anyone who's listening, this is a report that is well worth your time to look at. There are many gems. Of course, we just touched the surface. In fact, only talked about one of the many things, and we could have talked
Yep.
about, trade secrets, substance abuse, theft,
Mhm.
fraud, retaliation, violence at work,
Yep.
bribes. There are all of these things that I think most of us don't think about because we don't encounter them in our day to day. But it's so important to keep your eyes open so you can keep your organization be the kind of place that you want to work at. Thank you again, Erica, for joining us. And I hope this is helpful in terms of getting the word out about your work and in this report in particular.
Yeah, and Karen, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. And thank you to everybody who took the time to listen in, and particularly sending questions and comments, because at the end of the day, my hope is that everybody who reads this report finds at least one thing that you can use to make your own companies a better place to work. That's why we issued the report in the first place. And so hopefully everybody walks away with at least one thing you can implement yourself.
Terrific. Thanks again, Erica. Take good care.
You too.